be very explicit and emphatic in underscoring cultural marginality, not racial marginality, not economic marginality, not political marginality, although all of those may be in some way or another intertwined with cultural marginality, but I was not looking at those elements as being primary. And I have a slightly different take on the Desi doctors, because I think that while on one level they are not economically marginal, I think they are culturally marginal still. And my point was simply that if your aim is to somehow gain agency to the point that you can become a definer within the context of the dominant culture, then you may be banging your head up against a certain wall. Whereas if you indulge and engage your own cultural marginality, that may confer upon you a certain creative capacity, all right? Whereby through that cultural marginality, you're able to produce something that is an alternative, but equally authentic. Because the problem with the dominant culture is who owns it? And you'll never own that. You can create your own culture through the power of the margin. That's what I meant by that. I wasn't talking about economic or racial marginality, all right? What I was simply saying is that, sometimes being on the margin can feel like exclusion, but sometimes being on the margin can feel like being insulated from being co-opted and assimilated by powers who will then place you where they want you to be and not necessarily where you want to be yourself. The margin can insulate you in ways from that. And I'm not saying the margin is preferable or not. I'm simply saying that if it is a fact, then rather than ignore and reject the margin of a possible point of departure, that's something we need to think about.
I just want to offer kind of a reply to that. I actually do agree with what you're saying, but to clarify what I was getting at in terms of I should expand my demographic when I say Desi doctors, I'm referring to this large swath of Muslims who are being college educated and achieving careers and what are perceived as socially mobile, socially upward. And so what you have is really a difference between reality and perception. And yes, culturally, it's marginalized. It may be a minority. It may not be accepted by the larger American society. However, I think it's unfortunate that many people who do achieve this social mobility have this false aspiration that somehow they can become part of that majority. And I think we need to, and I see that as very difficult of overcoming.
But it's also important, I guess, just to recognize briefly that this is again, I guess, why I feel like we already have the indigenous culture or whatever, because that's a very American issue. Like, it's not, Muslims are not the first people to have to deal with this, right? And sort of dealing with white normativity and kind of like dealing with that and what that means when you're non-white. This is not, we're not the first people to do that. So I think it's so again, this is why we're so ensconced or sort of grounded in our realities. We're dealing with very American issues. And so it's not about sort of, again, like not about sort of thinking that we have to do something else, but it's about sort of looking at that and then working from there.
Can I make one last teeny comment? No, I mean, I think, Martin is right in detecting a certain point of departure in my comment, and that point of departure, takes off of the experience of the black community. There's no question about that. But I think that we should begin to think about that seriously. I mean, part of what I was trying to get at is this, that marginality can give you or grant you a certain license for cultural creation, all right? It's not a matter of being accepted by the dominant culture as a legitimate expression of the dominant culture. It's a matter of being accepted as authentically American. And I think that is where Muslims need to start thinking about this whole practice or this whole premise of indigenization. Think of it this way. And we were having this conversation over lunch today. What do you think the reaction would have been to Elijah Muhammad, leaving aside this whole Aqidah business? Just leave that aside for the moment. But what do you think the reaction would have been to him had he been white? And what I'm arguing is that that cultural marginality, all right, is what conferred upon him the opportunity to create something that could then go on and develop into other things. Whereas trying to do that from the center, it would have been virtually impossible.